This is a kind of a $1 million question. Does this data and the research that you're doing and all these patterns are sort of putting together allow us to predict anything about what's to come? Does it give us any predictive value about what's happening? Because I think a lot of people are concerned about the coming election cycle, the economic forecast that we have, the state of the president himself. There are a lot of things that have got people sort of concerned. Is there something in this data that allows us to have some idea about what's about to happen or what we might expect to be a trend in the next year or so?
That's a really good question. So the answer is partly yes. So an example I'll give is the summer before last, when there was when the Roe v. Wade was overturned, and there was a lot of abortion related protests and counter protests. And so we, as a group in a national working group that we collaborate with, we're very worried about violence breaking out on the ground. And so one of the things that, and unfortunately, there's so much to do on this front in trying to do temporal geospatial prediction of these things, and the topics change. So that's one of the things, is that oftentimes you can't, people like you and I, we can guess. But the topics do change that are the focal point for violence. And so that summer, that was a focal point for violence. And it was not something that we had really had on our radar up until that. And so I was burning the midnight oil, trying to do temporal and geospatial prediction of where most likely there was going to be violence. And so I remember that day very clearly. I had been working all day long. And finally, I think it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I had gotten some predictions for counties that were the top 5 counties that I believed, based on past protest activity and violence, that were most likely to be a focal point for violence related to abortion protests. And Maricopa County was one of those counties. And so I had finished that, and I was just about to write an email to everybody in our group, in the National Working Group. I thought, I should check the news. I haven't checked the news all day. And I opened up the news, and violence had broken out in Maricopa County at an abortion protest. And so it was very demoralizing for me, because I was doing my best, but oftentimes these things can happen. The situations can evolve so rapidly that it's hard to keep ahead of it. That being said, when it comes to things like, I've learned a lot, and we have learned a lot working together in the past few years about what the dynamics are in the community level that are important to trying to predict violence, that it is becoming something that the machinery kind of is set up. Like, before you can produce a can of peas, you have to build the can of peas factory. So we spent a big chunk of our time in the last few years building that factory to bring all the sources of data together, such that when the topics do change, we can more quickly now get temporal and geospatial predictions of where violence is perhaps more likely to break out. But that being said, that doesn't guarantee that's where violence is going to break out. You can say that it's more likely, but something may not happen. So that is the problem, is that we cannot predict with any guarantee where violence is going to break out, but we can try to get, say, a list of top 10 hotspots, and then try to work with community groups in those places to try to reduce the likelihood that place will become a hotspot for violence. So we are getting better at this. The good news is that we are getting a lot better and a lot faster at bringing together all these many sources of data that we use to try to predict where these types of violence are likely to break out.